Las Vegas, the summer of 1971. It was almost 2 in the morning, and the last show had ended more than an hour ago. The showroom was dark now, the tables cleared, the band long gone home. But in a narrow hallway behind the stage, one man was still waiting. Elvis Presley stood alone under a single hallway light, turning a ring slowly on his finger, waiting for a door to open. He was not there for a photograph. He was not there for the press. He had come, quietly, to ask Tom Jones one question. And it was a question he could not ask anyone else in the world. There were 1,000 people in that town who would have given anything for a private word with Elvis Presley that night. And here he was, standing in the dark outside a stranger's dressing room, hoping the man inside would understand. When Tom finally opened that door, he had no idea that the next few minutes would stay with him for the rest of his life. He did not know that 6 years later, he would replay this exact moment again and again, searching it for something he had missed. To understand what Elvis asked him that night, and why it broke something open in both of them, you have to understand what these two men were to each other in that strange, glittering city. By 1971, Tom Jones had everything a man from the Welsh Valleys was never supposed to have. The sold-out rooms, the records, the women throwing hotel keys onto the stage. And yet, in the quiet hours, he sometimes felt like a stranger inside his own success. He had grown up in a small terraced house in Pontypridd, the son of a coal miner, in a town where a boy's whole future was written the day he was born. He remembered the sound of his father coughing coal dust in the next room. He remembered singing in the front parlor because it was the one thing that made the grown-ups stop and listen. On Saturday nights, the neighbors would crowd into that little room, and the boy would stand on a chair and sing until his mother had to wipe her eyes with the corner of her apron. He never sang to become famous. He sang because he could not help it. Because a voice like that, in a house like that, was the only way out. Now he was out. He was further out than he had ever imagined. But fame had a strange way of making a man feel watched instead of seen. Tom knew how to give a crowd everything they came for. What he was still learning, in rooms like this one, was how to let another person see the part of him that was still that frightened boy back in Pontypridd. And that, though he did not know it yet, was exactly the part of him Elvis had come looking for. In 1971, Las Vegas belonged to a handful of voices, and 2 of the loudest came from opposite ends of the earth. Elvis Presley was in the middle of his legendary run at the International Hotel, filling more than 2,000 seats twice a night. A few blocks away, Tom Jones, a miner's son from Pontypridd, Wales, was doing the same thing night after night in a room that seemed to shake when he sang. They had met years before, and something rare had happened between them. Not rivalry, friendship, real friendship. Elvis would come to Tom's shows and stand in the shadows at the side of the stage, mouthing every word. Tom would slip into Elvis's suite after hours, and the 2 of them would sing old gospel songs together until the sun came up. No band, no audience, just 2 voices and a piano. On those nights, there were no fans, no managers, no reporters keeping score. There was only the music they had both grown up on, The old hymns from the little chapels of their childhoods, sung soft in a hotel suite high above a city that never slept. Because that was the secret almost no one knew. Behind the jumpsuits and the screaming crowds and the diamond rings, these were two working men who had come from nothing and who trusted almost no one. They trusted each other. So when Elvis needed to ask something he could not say out loud to another living soul, there was only one door in that whole city he could knock on. But to know why the question cost him so much, you have to know where Tom Jones was standing in his own life that year. It was late when Elvis came down that hallway. Tom had just come off stage. His shirt was still open at the collar, still damp, the roar of the crowd still ringing in his ears. The dressing room was small and warm, cluttered with the ordinary things of a working night: a towel, a half-empty glass, a jacket thrown over the back of a chair. Then there was a knock. Not the loud, easy knock of a friend dropping by. Something quieter than that, almost uncertain. When Tom opened the door, Elvis was standing there in the dim light, and Tom knew at once that this was not a social visit. Elvis was not smiling his usual easy smile. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. He asked if he could come in for a minute. The two men sat down, and for a while neither of them said very much. Elvis kept turning that ring on his finger, around and around, the way a man does when the words he came to say are heavier than he expected them to be. Tom waited. He had learned, in a life full of noise, exactly when to stay quiet. Somewhere down the hall a door closed, and a cleaner's cart rattled past, and still neither of them spoke. The glass on the table caught the light. The towel lay where Tom had dropped it. Two men who could command thousands sat in silence in a room barely big enough for a chair. And then Elvis looked up and asked him the question he had carried all the way down that hallway. It was not what Tom expected. To the world, Elvis Presley in 1971 was the most famous man alive. He had changed music itself. He had changed how a body could move on a stage, how a single voice could carry both the church and the sin in the same breath. When he walked into a room, the air changed. People forgot what they were saying. But those who stood close to him were beginning to notice something else. The nights were getting longer. The circle of men around him was getting tighter and stranger. He was performing to thousands and somehow becoming harder and harder to reach. Elvis had spent his whole life being adored by people who did not know him at all, and the more they worshipped the image, the more the man behind it seemed to quietly disappear. He was surrounded, always surrounded, and more alone than almost anyone understood. There were people around him who loved him, and people around him who only needed him, and by 1971, it was becoming harder and harder to tell the two apart. Everyone wanted something from the king. Almost no one simply asked him how he was. That was the thing about Elvis, that even his closest friends struggled to say out loud. He could fill an entire arena with his voice and still not be able to answer the simplest question about his own heart. So on that summer night in 1971, he did something he almost never did. He went looking, not for an audience, but for an answer. And he went looking for it at Tom Jones's door. Tom thought for a moment, And then he told Elvis the only thing he knew to be true. "You don't sing for them," he said. "You never did. You sing because back home it was the one thing that was yours. The house, the town, the mine, none of it was ever yours, but your voice was. So you keep singing for that boy, the one who sang before any of this ever happened. You sing for him, and the rest of them can listen if they want to." For a long moment, Elvis said nothing at all. Then, slowly, he nodded. Tom saw something move across his friend's face. Relief, maybe, or grief, or both of them at once. The most famous man in the world sat in that small, warm dressing room and let himself, for just a few minutes, be no one special. Just a boy from Tupelo who used to sing on a front porch while his mother listened through an open window. For a moment, you could almost see that boy again, sitting there under the diamonds and the lights. The fear that had come down the hallway with him seemed to loosen its grip just a little. They talked a little longer after that, about home, about their mothers, about the songs they had first learned to sing before anyone was paying. Quieter now, easier. Then Elvis stood, put his hand on Tom's shoulder, and thanked him. Not for the answer, exactly, but for hearing the real question. He turned the ring on his finger one last time, and then he was gone, back down the hallway, back into the light and the noise. Tom would not know for years how much that one night would come to mean. "Tom," Elvis said at last, his voice low, "how do you do it?" Tom did not understand at first. Do what? The shows? The singing? Elvis shook his head slowly. "How do you keep it yours?" he asked. "When everyone out there wants a piece of you, how do you sing like it still belongs to you?" The room went very still. Because this was not a question about technique. It was not the kind of question one entertainer asks another to trade little tricks of the trade. It was a man who had given the whole world his voice, quietly asking whether there was any of it left that was still his own. Tom understood in that moment that Elvis was not really asking about music at all. He was asking how to stay a person when the whole world only wants the picture. He was asking, in the only language two singers had, how not to disappear. And Tom, sitting across from him, felt the weight of it land, because he had felt that same fear himself on nights when the applause was loudest and the room afterward was emptiest. He had wondered the same thing standing in the wings, listening to strangers scream a name that no longer sounded like his own. And Tom Jones, the miner's son, who had spent his own life trying to answer that very same question, knew that he had to say something true. Not something clever, not something comforting, something true. What he said next was simple, but Elvis would carry it with him, and so would Tom. 6 years later, in August of 1977, Tom Jones got the news that Elvis Presley was gone. He was 42 years old. And in the days that followed, while the whole world mourned the king, the jumpsuits, the records, the statistics of a legend, Tom found himself returning again and again to one small memory. A narrow hallway, a single light, a ring turning on a finger, and a question. How do you keep it yours? Tom understood, too late, what his friend had really been asking that night. Elvis had been trying to find his way back to the boy who sang before the whole world was watching. And somewhere along the way, in the noise and the crowds and the endless nights, he had lost the road home. Tom Jones would go on singing for another 50 years. Into his 70s, into his 80s, his voice weathered but never broken. He outlived the fashions that had once tried to bury him and the doubters who said his time was done. And people who knew him said that whenever someone asked how he had kept going for so long, he would think of that night in Vegas and give some version of the same answer he had once given his friend. You sing for the boy who sang first. Everything else is just the noise. Two men from nowhere who filled the biggest rooms in the world. One of them found his way home. The other left behind a question worth carrying. How do you keep it yours? And maybe that question was never really only about singing. Maybe it was about all of us, and the part of ourselves we try so hard not to lose, no matter how loud the world around us gets. The boy who sang first, he is still in there, in every one of us, waiting to be heard.